Welcome to our channel Scary Sagas, where we bring you the most amazing true horror stories. Do you know what Nevada is? Due to the large lengths of desert and arid territory that separate its towns, it may not be as well known as other states. However, allow me to share with you a tale of my exploration of this fascinating location. I was traveling alone on the I-95 on my way back to Oregon. Around 8 or 9 o'clock on a calm October evening, the night sky was completely dark. I'm not easily afraid, and I like the peace and quiet that nighttime driving provides, so I never felt uneasy while doing it. Young and carefree as I was, I didn't pay much attention to my gasoline gauge while on the road. The next rest station was still at least 15 or 20 miles away, so I knew that I hadn't been very prudent in limiting my petrol. I was about to start panicking about running out of petrol when I noticed something out in the distance. I was in awe of it. I could see a petrol station's lights and building there, in the middle of a big desert. It was an individual, unbranded station rather than a well-known chain. Like so many other interesting stops one may find in this region of the nation, the business seemed to be well lit, and a rectangular sign boldly announced that it was open 24/7. Even though I couldn't understand why it hadn't been on my map before the trip, I felt tremendously happy to have found it. I pulled into the station without giving it much consideration and made the risky decision. I noticed a few odd things when I walked into the business. Although it was a typical gas station, everything inside looked to be extraordinarily clean. The food products packaging, though, was what really drew my eye. It resembled going back in time. Do you recall the classic white-top Doritos packages from the 1970s? Well, that's how all the bags in the shop seemed. Not only the Doritos had a vintage vibe, the entire selection of food and drinks in the cooler did too. I was upset that I couldn't locate any water, so I picked up a Coke with a vintage logo instead. A lovely, elderly woman welcomed me as I brought my drink to the counter. Now, I don't recall much about her other than the fact that she had a lovely plastic rose pinned to her blouse, giving her bald head a pop of color. As I set my drink down on the counter, she gave me a quizzical glance before manually ringing up the transaction on her antique register with an air of antiquated elegance. It's interesting that I couldn't find a card reader on the counter anywhere. Instead, the register's price, a meager 10, was shown in classy analog type. The price of the drink surprised me favorably, but I didn't wonder about it. I smiled and replied, "Put the rest into pump 1." I then placed $50 cash on the counter. The woman cautiously placed the money into the register after picking it up and inspecting it as though it were a priceless treasure. I grabbed up my beverage and headed back outside while she remained silent and just stared at me intensely. I struggled a little with the unusual pump's construction, but eventually filled up my car. Since the gas flowed out for a considerable amount of time, it appeared that she had added more fuel than what I had paid for. Even though it felt like I had plenty of petrol left, I stopped pumping when I looked at my car's fuel gauge and saw that it was almost full. I said to myself, well, the next lucky person who stops here will get a free fill-up. I turned on my automobile and re-entered the highway. I must have been on the road for around 5 minutes before I chanced to check my gasoline gauge once again. I became aware that something was off at that point. It revealed that my tank was once more nearly empty. It was beyond my comprehension. Did I misinterpret the gauge while I was filling up with gas earlier? As doubt began to creep into my head, I decided to go back in search of the rest station I had just left. I was perplexed when I got to the general area. There weren't any lights to be seen. In an effort to get a better look at my surroundings, I turned on my highlights, and that's when I noticed it. I could see the rest stop, or more rather, what was left of it, in the glare of my headlights reflecting from a partially broken window. The gas station was on my left, but it was only a rundown remnant of what I had previously seen. Only the skeleton bones of the overhang remained after the petrol pumps had long since vanished. The structure itself was in ruins, with wood boards covering the front and obvious flaws in the foundation as well as broken windows. It appeared as though time had ruthlessly destroyed the area. A knee swept through me, and my heart began to speed. There was obviously a problem here. I turned on my headlights, parked my car in front of the deteriorating doors, and got out. The building seemed even more run down when I got closer to it. It was an antiquated antique that had not been used in many years. I pushed on the corroded doorknob of the door with my hand. It struggled, but eventually opened with a terrifying creak. I recalled seeing a light panel on the way out, so I instinctively looked for it. It was still there, to my surprise, proving that this was the same location. A lone light flicked on above the register, and there was a little buzzing noise. The room's soft yellow tone was emitted by the bulb's weak glow. The remnants of the goodies I had previously seen in their antique packaging were scattered across the floor in the form of crumpled bags. The coolers and most of the shelves were gone, leaving an eerie void in their place. But the register and the counter were still there. I made a cautious approach because I wasn't sure what to anticipate. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust in the dim light, with the exception of one little object, a crimson-red plastic rose. It was artfully positioned in the middle of the counter, the flower facing away from me. I picked up the rose out of sheer curiosity. As soon as I touched it, I felt a powerful rush of emotion. It was similar to listening to a well-crafted, melancholy piece of music where every note embodies the composer's feelings. When I held the plastic flower, I experienced it. I believed I heard a few murmurs at that very time, and I suddenly felt compelled to turn around. Therefore, I did. To my amazement, though, I could see neither anything nor anyone. Strangely, though, the door that had only a minute previously been rusty and jammed was suddenly swinging back and forth, as if someone had just sprinted through it. I quickly walked out of the petrol station. Fortunately, throughout the rest of my journey, my fuel gauge never fell lower, and I arrived at the following real rest break without any additional problems. I still have a hard time understanding what I went through. I've never told anyone I know about this tale, though I made an effort to explain it away as a dream. Deep down I knew I was awake. It's difficult to refute, especially because I still have the plastic rose in my possession. I grabbed it off the counter, fastened it to my rearview mirror, and stole it. I have an odd combination of peace and memory whenever I look at it. The sensation is indescribable. I tried to look up the enigmatic rest area online, but I couldn't find any information about it. I don't think I'll ever really understand what occurred or who that woman was. Maybe certain facts are destined to be lost in the sands of time, hidden from view. I want to wish the best of success and safety on your travels to all the nocturnal drivers out there. Be careful, and may you always be protected. I was 16 years old at the time, and it all happened in the summer of 2010. You already know I'm a man from that. I recently received a fantastic job offer from a petrol station thanks to my friend Ryan. The sole drawback to the position was the station's location, which prevented it from having any other benefits, such as discounts or free soda from the gas station fountain. It was in the middle of nowhere, some 30 minutes from the city where I was living. The highway I used to get there split off at a road that headed to my place of employment. I worked the graveyard shift the next day from 10 to 3 in the morning. However, I didn't mind because I was a night owl myself and didn't go to bed until around 5 in the morning. My shift was largely empty, and when customers did arrive, it was usually to pay for petrol. Before this particular day, I had never been afraid of the visitors. I had about a half hour remaining on my job before I could finally leave for home as it was nearing its conclusion. During my shift, which was rather busy, I had around 5 individuals come in. I was sitting at the register, just going through Instagram because I was so bored. The last person to purchase a Coke and petrol had been there for an hour. I probably drank 3 liters or so of Coke that night, so I got up to use the restroom. My boss had instructed me to lock the gas station's doors when I went to the restroom because I was the only person there. But this time I didn't. I never had to lock them since no one ever entered. I finished up, washed, and then left before returning to the pay register. I became aware that a man had entered the store at that point. I became angry because someone had to enter the one time I forgot to lock the door. He was observing the beer as he stood on the opposite side of the little petrol station. He appeared to be on a rocking ship because of the way he was swaying. The man was speaking loudly and was dressed in all black slacks and a hooded sweatshirt. He had just finished rolling about outside, so the clothing was caked in mud. He smelled like roadkill and urine, which was the worst part. I had to conceal my nose with my shirt since it poked up the only store. I wasn't at all frightened. Rather, I was more inquisitive. When he remained still, the creepiness began to take hold. He did nothing except stare at the drink while facing away from me for 10 minutes. Although I doubt inebriated individuals could endure so long, I initially assumed he must have been intoxicated. I addressed him as Sir from the pay register after 10 minutes. He didn't say anything. Instead, he just kept swaying while gazing at the drink. I questioned him, "Sir, are you going to buy something?" But he remained silent. At this moment, I was quite frightened and unsure of what to do. The next action I took was among my worst decisions ever. I made the decision to ask him to leave. I went down the short distance to him. I gave him a little smack on the back and urged him to go. I was so terrified at this point that it came out more like a whimper. He stopped swaying once I told him this. He gently whirled around and fixed his gaze on me. I had never experienced terror like that. It prevented me from breathing, moving, or speaking. I was unable to move after seeing his face and instead just remained there gazing at him. He appeared to be at least 100 years old due to the filth on his face. A large cut that ran diagonally across his face from the top left of his forehead was gushing blood. He appeared to have sustained a facial injury with an axe. The worst thing was his eyes. He appeared to be blind from their milky whiteness. I'm not sure if he was blind or merely partially so, but he simply kept staring at me, and I had the impression that he was peeping into my soul. He shoved me with much power that I was unaware of it. He drew a 10-inch long Bowie knife from behind him as I stumbled and fell back to the ground. The fact that the tip was coated in the blood caused me to feel so terrified that I almost fainted. He towered over me like a lion watching a wounded gazelle. When the shock eventually subsided, I was able to think properly. I was able to lift myself back up to my feet by lowering myself with my hands. I quickly hurried to the restroom, turned around, and locked the door after slamming it shut. The restroom was a tiny square white box that was covered with graffiti. Ironically, given all the turbo luck I was experiencing, the mirror was cracked. I dug into my pocket to get my phone after forgetting I had left it near the till. When I heard the tap of this Bowie knife on the door, I looked down to see the shadow his feet were made under the door. The creeper yelled "Open up" and started pounding on the door with increasing force. I just want to sit in a corner and fall asleep at this point to stop having to deal with this. But it was then that I noticed the window over the bathroom. One of those little rectangle windows served as the opening. I sat down on the toilet and started to open the window. I pushed out the window screen and turned to face the other way. On my side of the door, I could see that he had created a sizable dent. I yelled at him before shoving my head through the window. My hand suddenly began to ache as I landed on my hands. I shed a few tears and shouted a bit at the discomfort. I stood up and started running down the street despite the discomfort. The man was rushing after me at great speed as I turned around. As soon as my adrenaline started flowing, I started running as quickly as I could. I ran for approximately 5 minutes and then stopped to collect my breath. I turned to look behind me and saw that the physio wasn't following me any longer, so I kept moving along with the rod. The sun started to rise after how long we had been walking. The last thing I wanted was to come across another creeper, so I resisted the urge to extend my hand and hitchhike. I sprinted to the police car when I spotted it at a rest area. I went with the cops to grab my phone at the petrol station after telling them everything that had transpired. Despite our best efforts, the guy has never been apprehended. I left my work shortly after that happened. My biggest worry right now is that he'll show up at my new night job. Before I begin, I should note that I am around 6 feet and 3 inches tall and that this incident occurred in the midst of the summer of 2015. I was quite thrilled to have recently obtained a position in field sales. The pay is excellent, and the business I worked for even provided me with a company car. The main drawback of my employment is that it sometimes requires me to drive across many states because my sales area is so large. And my employers occasionally ask me to drive to most of my clients. However, I felt thankful because not many people my age receive opportunities like this. After a few weeks of getting the swing of things, a clinic in northwestern Florida called me on the phone and asked me to come to provide a demonstration of our product. I assured them that I would arrive the next day at noon. I-65 would take me directly through the center of Alabama on my trip, and it would then take me through Alabama State Route 113 on the way to Florida. I had aimed to be there at 11 p.m. the previous evening. It was already dark when I passed Montgomery, and it was about 9:30. The fact that it was night didn't concern me because I traveled large miles at night before. I exited as soon as I spotted the Flomaton exit sign. I stopped at a petrol station and got an energy drink for myself since I had just realized that it was nearly 10 p.m. and I wanted to get to my destination in time. When I got back on the road, I saw that I was going to be driving in the middle of nowhere. After traveling for approximately 25 minutes via farmland, fields, small villages, and other locations, I reached another town and halted at a McDonald's to get some fresh air. I came upon a sign as soon as I was back on the highway and traveling south. Farm machinery and deer crossing was written on the sign. Crap, another arduous journey across the wilderness. I realized that my car was running low on gas after approximately 10 minutes. After a few minutes, I was simply hoping that there wouldn't be a gas station anytime soon so that I wouldn't be trapped on a country road in the middle of the night. I made an effort to use as little petrol as I could as I traveled down the rural route. My automobile was ready to run out of petrol totally when I noticed a little gas station a mere quarter-mile distant. When I arrived, I saw that this gas station was completely empty and in very bad shape. I discovered that the fill-up tanks were open just as I began to believe that this location wasn't open. I was gazing at my phone after the car had been refueled when I abruptly heard a barely audible sound coming from the gas station's roof. I then raised my head while keeping silent to attempt to hear the sound once more. Nothing. There was complete silence. I made the decision to stop driving for the evening and spend the night in the car since I assumed it was probably nothing and that I was probably simply exhausted from the long drive. I briefly regarded my phone before drifting off to sleep. After a solid hour or two of sleep, I awoke to the same sounds in the same location. This time, I stepped outside of my vehicle to look around. That was a big mistake. When my eyes adjusted, I noticed a large, human-like creature squatting on the roof. I had moved to the road to get a better view of the roof. "What are you doing up there?" I asked. I screamed. Then, all of a sudden, the creature rose. It then met my eyes and let out this enormous, ear-piercing shriek, which I can still clearly remember. The next thing I recall, it jumped to the ground, and I was struck by how all it was. This item appeared to be taller than 8 feet based on how tall I am. It then sped towards the woods inhumanly quickly. After viewing it, I am certain that it wasn't a skunk ape, but rather something far worse. I sprinted as quickly as I could back to the car to leave as soon as possible. My heart was thumping so quickly that it almost leaked out of my chest. If I had been asleep, only God knows what that beast could have done to me. I sought solace in a hotel room after I arrived in the closest town. I remained up all night and then traveled to my destination. Few months after my experience, I can still clearly recall seeing this TV program on enigmatic animals in America. I recall reading this passage about a strange creature that resembled what I saw that evening. I do occasionally have nightmares about what I witnessed that evening. Because of that encounter, I'm now afraid to drive at night on rural highways. And any time I stop at a gas station at night, I make sure there are at least 1 or 2 cars present.